Hello, this is Michael Hexter, and welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So, this episode I'm calling Socialism is either a revision and extension of liberalism, or its negation and overthrow, but not both. So, this issue is something that the conflicts over support for Ukraine um, on the left, I think, bring to the fore, and it's something, or that it creates this cleavage in people who consider themselves to be left, and as I said in the last episode, there are the resounding or the resonance of Marxism and the attitude of Karl Marx and his followers about liberalism, and also about the state, and about the idea that the state would wither away, that there would be no need for law and rights and so forth and so on in this future withered away state, this communism, small c communism that he envisioned. That vision, or you could say fantasy even, and that's obviously there's judgment associated with that. I'm owning the judgment involved in that. But anyway, so the resonance of that history is affecting the discussions about, in ghostly forms, in various ghostly forms, because there are not many people who declare themselves as Marxist anymore, and there is no regime involved in the Ukraine conflict that is even capital C communist. Okay, though there still in Asia some countries that, and also in a couple other parts of the world, that call themselves communist, or have the legacy of being a communist regime. So, but anyway, despite the fact that there's no active either Marxist or communist movement in that area of the world, there's still resonance of Marxism's attitude toward liberalism. And to me, in my perception, the Ukrainian people seem to be fighting very, very hard for what one might call liberal rights, not necessarily embracing what we in the United States call liberalism currently, or even what was called in the 1960s liberalism, but liberalism from basically the 18th century on, the sense of a state that guaranteed individual rights, including rights to property, rights to speech, rights to a voice in form of voting, in democracy, the emergence of democracies, what Marx called bourgeois democracies. But anyway, that seems to be the goal of the Ukrainian struggle, to attain that, in contrast to a anti-liberal Putinist regime that's the current Russian government, that is trying to, it seems, certainly to take over Ukraine and erase Ukrainian identity and so forth and so on, and be an imperialist in that area of the world, but with this system of basically not guaranteeing rights, not assigning individuals power to vote and to have a choice, or at least if they do, to have that in a very formalized way, that is not meant to form to have any serious competition between different views, between parties and so forth and so on. And so anyway, now there are all kinds of flaws. There's no pure example of this, very free form of liberalism in the world, and there's all kinds of flaws in American democracy, in democracies in other countries. and there's also the problem of the form of imperialism that originates in those countries and their dominance in the world system economically, and also as it's expressed in U.S. military dominance in many parts of the world, and the imposition of a system of extraction of value and of resources from less advantaged parts of the world, the developing world. So anyway, but still, the cleavage in the people at the left about whether Ukraine is, whether to support Ukrainians in the struggle for kind of basic self-determination, so forth and so on, or not, and overlooking it, brings to, at least in my mind, a more general question that one can apply with or without that particular struggle happening. It just happens to bring to mind and clarify the fights about how to achieve socialism and what socialists or people who declare themselves to be socialist have done in history, and how they've sort of migrated to different positions, basically one being quote unquote reformism, or basically electoral democracy and participating in electoral systems that exist at what was called bourgeois democracy, or you can call liberal democracy, or to attempt to form your own vanguard party and try to overthrow whatever system, whether it's an autocracy, a democracy that exists in a particular country, and that's the sort of what was the choice throughout the, let's say, since the 19th century and to the late 20th century, or even today. But it's now kind of, there are not really many strong movements at all for either revolution or reform. I mean, there are some in Latin America and in other places. There are movements toward the reformist direction. But anyway, I think this clarifies, in a way, for me, the idea that socialism is social, or it's a question. And I mean, I come down on the side of it's an extension, it's a revision and extension of liberalism, rather than a negation and overthrow of. And the reason I do that is that the idea of overthrow of liberalism and the withering away of the state is so fraught with unrealistic ideas, and has no concept of what the state would be, that once you quote unquote overthrow liberalism or overthrow whatever autocracy you live in, capitalist system, a political system in a capitalist society, because there are a number of different political systems associated with capitalism, including autocracy, including even now quote unquote capital C communism in countries like China or Vietnam, that have essentially a capitalist system, with strong state management. But anyway, in a different form of management than what happens in Europe, or during the social democratic, or the height of the social democratic period in Europe after the Second World War. So, but anyway, still the ideology in terms of how people think, this sort of idea of overthrow is based, in my opinion, in my view, on this lack of a theory of the state, and therefore what ends up being replacing the state that you supposedly overthrow is a autocratic and sometimes genocidal state that so without Marxism giving no guidance to socialists or communists in the formation of their state, and how a state can either effectively wither away according to Marx's plan, or effectively manage some kind of planned economy, and in doing in a way that's effective, that promotes prosperity, and now in our era promotes sustainability and circularity, which is what we want to achieve. None of that is delivered by Marx's theory, in part because he was, and this is, I'll do another video about this, he was an idealist. He had this idealistic ideas about states and their withering away, and about human nature to some extent, that were, overly optimistic. Not that I am with the crowd that is very pessimistic about human nature and very negative about it, but you still have to be pretty naive to follow his view of what would happen, both in terms of as a political theory, but also in sort of collective operations and how organizations work, but then also how the individual human within that context, what is their primary set of motivations, and how they respond to different types of situations, so forth and so on. So, and the variety, human variety as well. Not every individual is the same. So, anyway, the idea, though, that if we then stay with, so if we're dismissing the idea that socialism can effectively be a overthrow or negation, we then have to look at, well, what is the revision and extension of liberalism and basically liberal rights? What does that look like? How do you do it? What do people who are socialists, who either get elected, or movements towards socialism, or movements toward a socialistic kind of society, not necessarily that calls itself socialism, but a more socialistic society, what do they do, and how do they operate, and how do they design legal systems, how do they make laws, and how do they operate the finances of their government, and so forth and so on, and operate on the economy, and how what's an optimally free or free and prosperous society, with it's egalitarian. How does that work? So, just to sort of, maybe as a weird note, it's like, I thought of myself as a socialist for, a couple decade and a half of my life, and then, I don't consider myself now. I consider myself maybe a left social democrat or something, but I am for going more socialistic in our society, in capitalistic societies, and I am curious to see if we can design and not only design but enact a society that is close to socialism, or like socialism, and isn't dominated by a capitalist class that is greed driven, and so forth and so on. That we look at, human well-being, and human equality and human diversity, and that we allow for the growth of human potential within the confines of our ecological setting, and the biosphere, and also try to correct the damage we've done to the biosphere that is, endangering us right now as a civilization and maybe as a species. So anyway, so this idea, though, there's a mind, you'd say a mind virus that is stuck in some people from mostly Marx or the Marxist tradition, that where you have negation and overthrow as being of liberalism, and therefore also hostility to people who call themselves liberals, or who seem liberalish, or quote unquote shit libs, or something like that, and that these and I'm not saying any of those people are exemplary people who I want to follow because of who they are and what they do and so forth and so on. There, I have many, and we'll do another episode about, or maybe more than one, about the characteristics that draw hatred, and that are some of which are, I think, are not just sort of a personal attack, but they're based on a certain, we could say elitism and so forth and so on, or and grandiosity and so forth that draws this out of people. But what is it about? So that's a side issue of the people who identify with liberalism, and what do you think and identify as liberals. But is then your project, though, to create this freer society? Are you still borrowing, maybe around the side, or are you a someone who is maybe suing for a system that really is an extension and revision of those rights, but you need to actually then think it out, think it through. How do you get there, and how do we get from here to there? And it appears as though a lot of that has to do with writing laws and enacting laws and having systems that enact those laws, and also that does actions, this government that you want does actions that are promoting the human welfare and sustainability and the circularity of the economy that we need to develop, and also creates livelihoods for everybody in the society. And so anyway, so this system and a dignified livelihood. So anyway, so some of this is an extension of or is born out of liberal ideas, and so we need to be clear. And I haven't worked all of those things out, but we need to be clear then how that works, and then and also how then our strategies where we go right and wrong in promoting certain laws or certain campaigns for something. So there's some demands that are clearly sort of these demands that are accepted by a broad spectrum of the population, from sort of center to left, and that those are, or these sort of transitional demands that people call them, or system challenging demands that subtly alter the system that we live in. And those are things that we've sort of happened upon. But is there a way to be clearer in terms of our thinking about what are those demands, and how do they create a new system, and how do they maintain certain aspects of the old system that are valuable, or that are the platform or the foundation, or they need to be maybe revised in certain ways. So like freedom of speech or something, or the ability to vote, and all those things come from liberalism. And democracy, the idea of democracy, and so we want a deeper democracy. We want to extend democracy into the workplace. We want to have a more democratic workplace, and so maybe entirely democratic, and with no distinction between anybody who has any role within that, or maybe there are some distinctions that we need to maintain for it to function in its broader social mission, and so and those are those are is thinking that is not well. It's not well supported by our existing, let's say, certainly Marxist tradition, of thinking of things, or that certainly that is one of the strongest traditions. And we also have mutations off the Marxist tradition now, where you have these, particularly Russia, is still mistaken by, or some of the people on the left in the non-Russian countries or in Western Europe or the United States as being sort of the inheritor of a quasi-socialist system when it isn't anymore. It's post-communist, but it's also autocratic and fascist, at least incipiently, or yes, right now it's being whipped into a fascist militaristic society, and that's basically spurred on by one but maybe a ruling clique, not just Putin. But anyway, Putin is certainly the dominant political figure in that. Anyway, so this idea of, you really, if you come down on the side of its extension and revision, you just start thinking about things differently. Socialism, or, creating this egalitarian, democratic commonwealth. You think about things differently, and it's not a cop out. It's not a worse than. It's not a less. It's not less left, you could say, than the overthrow position. It just is more. You focus on, well, how are we going to really build this system? And it might require a revolutionary moment if the old system, if this effort to revise and reform is blocked at every turn. Yes, there could be but the point is not the overthrow of everything. It's not the negation of everything in the current society. It's the revision and extension of, revision, or it could be also certain things are thrown out of the laws and so forth and so on, but it's not a society without law and with. So anyway, so it doesn't sound, for some people who are not familiar with Marxism so much, it sounds ridiculous for me to say these things, but in a way, there is this, and I'll do another video about this, that there's an anarchistic element to Marx that is just not sustainable. It's not something that can sustain, or a civilization of any kind, or a social organization of a certain size, a nation of a certain size, requires some kind of government. Anyway, so and that's, some people don't feel that way, and they don't want to realize what I think is just very, very, very obvious and straightforward. And it's not, again, those people aren't more morally superior. They just don't want to come to terms with certain realities, and you can push things. You can have a very radical vision within the context of recognizing that we need also to have a future society with better laws and better mechanisms for expressing popular will, and more dynamic political systems that help the society adapt to new realities. But anyway, I think this is where I want to leave it off here. And, I don't know if this is as clarifying to you as it was to me, this sort of moment of realization that, you really, it's not the idea that it's reformism versus revolution. I am saying if you follow the reform path and there is a blockage of any ability to reform and revise, there could be a revolution that is necessary. You don't want to. What I'm saying is, you don't plan on it. You don't say it's got to be that, and I think that also places you. And I'll do another video about this on a stronger moral foundation, okay, which you need to establish as a political movement. Anyway, so please share your thoughts in the comments below, and maybe we can have a discussion there. Please like the video if you got anything out of it. Please subscribe to Politics 2100, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.